Hello, welcome to another edition of The Intel with Greg Cosell on Inside the Birds. I'm Geoff Mosher from Inside the Birds, alongside Adam Caplan, also from Inside the Birds. And with us is the main man, the star, and that's Greg Cosell. And Greg today is going to switch sides of scrimmage. The last two editions, I should say. We focused mostly on wide receivers, tight ends, pass catchers. We are going to go to the other side and go look heavily into an area that we expect the Eagles will be targeting pretty early in the draft, and that's the secondary. We'll talk about cornerbacks. We'll talk safeties. We'll get Greg's breakdowns. Greg, before we even discuss any names, just in general, your thoughts on this cornerback and safety class. Is it as deep as what we talked about with wide receivers, or do you think that you got to get one early if you want a good one if you're looking at corner or safety this year?
Well, those are always tough questions, Geoff, for me to answer, because I think that corners and safeties, like a lot of positions, guys have different traits. Different traits that work in certain defenses may not work as well in others. It depends on your evaluation of those traits. There's certain players that I really like, for instance, that maybe others don't. Because ultimately coaches see it as fitting into scheme adaptability. So corners are always in demand just because of the use on offense in the NFL of 11 personnel with 3 wide receivers. So you can never have enough corners.
Right.
So they'll always be in demand. The question is, does someone look at Tariq Woolen at 6'4", running a 4.36", who's only played corner for 2 years, and think, hey, in 2 or 3 years, this guy's going to be just a phenomenal player? Or does someone look at, Trent McDuffie, who's essentially the size of Tre'Davious White, who's a pretty good player, and say, you know what, this guy can step right in and he can play corner for me tomorrow.
Right.
So there's so many factors that go into play in how teams, organizations, coaches look at this. So, the only thing I would say is corners will always be in demand. And I think that safety has become more in demand because of the changing nature of the NFL game. You must match up to tight ends. You must match up to tight ends who detach from the formation. You have to play man coverage at some point. You can't just sit in zone in today's NFL. So, it's 2 positions that matter. Corner would probably still be seen more as a premium position, but you really can't run a full defensive playbook without quality safeties in today's NFL.
Interesting, Adam. Did you hear that?
I know. I knew that your eyes lit up. Greg, when you first started covering, I watched grading tape in the early 90s, I'd say.
Yes, that's when I started NFL tape, college tape after that.
Right. But looking at going from back then to now, how has the game evolved? The NFL game, not the college game, but the NFL game evolved with safeties in particular and what they're asked to do. Like you were talking about tight ends and so forth, but because when I first started covering the league, it was all right, free safety here, strong safety there, and now it doesn't seem to be the same. What's changed?
I think there was always a feeling, as you guys know, years and years ago, you can get a safety anywhere. That's kind of the way people thought. Oh, you can wait till the 4th and 5th round. Safeties back in the day were a little more delineated in that you had a post safety and you had a strong safety. So it was really strong and free were the terms that were used. Your free safety played on the back end. He had a certain series of traits. Your box safety or your strong safety, he had a different set of traits that made him more like a linebacker for the most part. And if you have an unbelievably great defense from top to bottom, like the Legion of Boom did, you could get away with that. You could have Cam Chancellor play what was essentially a glorified linebacker position at 6'4", 232. And you could have Earl Thomas, who was the best post safety in the game for a number of years there. So you could do that. Now, anybody you talk to will tell you that what they'd ideally like would be interchangeable safeties is really the key. They don't want to get stuck because it makes your defense too predictable from a tactical standpoint. You don't want to get stuck with having a post safety and a box safety, because now the defense knows coverage-wise what you're going to play, because there's all kinds of zone coverages. Like cover 3 has different kinds of variations within cover 3. But if you have a box safety and a post safety, the variations decrease. So, everybody would like what Buffalo has. They've got Hyatt and Poyer, who are interchangeable players, and therefore arguably they might have as good, and I can't think of every team off the top of my head right now, but they have as good, if not the best safety duo in the league, because those guys can essentially do anything.
Well, we definitely know the Eagles need help at both positions. We know from our reporting last year, the Eagles went into the draft with really high marks on especially corners, guys like Patrick Surtain and also J.C. Horn. We're not able to get that and really haven't done much at that position since, except for throwing some darts on late round guys or
Hey, Geoff, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
If either one of those guys was there at the Eagles pick, would they have taken one of those guys?
Yes.
Then
to my knowledge, yes. Well, remember they traded up, but they
ended up trading up because both Surtain and Horn were gone.
Right. They did look into Surtain as I understood it back then last year, but yes, they wound up going up and getting Devontae Smith.
Right.
So let's look at the cornerback situation this year. Even with the Eagles pick, the Eagles have a lot of first round ammunition, so they could potentially move up if they want to, and it feels like they would have to, just based on what we hear. For a guy like Ahmad Gardner. What I want to ask you is, at this time last year, Greg, the name to look out for was the LSU kid. That was Derek Stingley. He was almost considered a top 5, no doubt about it type of guy. And since then till now, Ahmad Gardner seems to be that guy. Not that Stingley isn't considered good, but how do you compare and contrast both of these cornerbacks and how they would fit in with what the Eagles do?
Well, to me, Gardner's the alpha dog corner in this draft. I mean, I think Gardner's the best corner prospect in the draft. You play a lot more man coverage in today's NFL. The Eagles clearly, as the season progressed, started to play more man coverage. Gardner was the boundary corner in the Cincinnati defense. He played a ton of zero man because of the safety to that side, often helped out in other areas, so he just matched up. He is, to me, kind of the prototype that teams would be looking for today. He's long, he's 6'3", he's rangy, he's athletic, he's super competitive. He plays a ton of press man. He's aggressive and annoying. He makes it really difficult for receivers. It's probably not a fun day for them. So to me, Gardner is the top corner prospect in this draft. He was a fun player to watch. I watched him last summer from 2020. I watched him this year. He's super competitive. He's got sticky man coverage traits. He can play both forms of press man, what we call mirror match press man, where you allow the receiver to declare his release and then you simply get in his hip pocket, whether it's his inside hip pocket or his outside hip pocket, or you physically jam him at the line of scrimmage. And when you have body length like he does and arm length like he does, those are two really big factors in your ability to play man coverage and press man. And he's got great play speed. One thing that showed up is whenever anybody ran crossing routes against him, nobody ran away from him. He just stayed with crossers the entire way through.
Do you think Greg, he can make real quick? Do you think he can make an argument, Greg? I know you haven't watched every single guy yet.
That he's the best player in the draft.
Yes, like not just at his position, but the best overall player.
Yes, I think that argument could be made. Yes, I think he's a better. I mean, again, now you get into positions, but I don't think that Hutchinson or Thibodeau or other premium positions. You have to think of it that way. We're not discussing offensive guards, obviously, but I think of the premium positions that are viewed as premium in the NFL, corner is certainly that, as is pass rusher, as is quarterback. I think you could make an argument, yes. I mean, if others disagree, I'm fine with that. I'm not, this is not a mathematical equation, but I think you could make the argument.
His official time was 4.41 for a guy 6'2 3/4. To me, is excellent.
And his 10-yard split for a guy who's high cut and long legged was 1.54, which is very good.
Yes. So, what did his play speed look like to you on tape?
Really good play speed. As I mentioned, running with crossers, nobody ran away from him. Never saw receivers run away from him crossing the field. Yeah, his play speed is really, really good. I mean, there are times he looks a little leggy, just because he's long. He did have a tendency, and this has to be cleaned up. No one's perfect. No one enters as the league as a finished product that doesn't require coaching and cleanup of some kind. He'd have a tendency to get a little grabby and handsy at times. That you can in college, much more so than the NFL. But yes, I mean, if you wanted to nitpick, you could say there are times he's a little upright and a little leggy, just because that's the way he's built.
How would you compare him to Horn and Surtain last year?
Right.
Is he equal prospect, better, same, little, not as much?
Wow. I would probably say, and I liked Surtain more than Horn. I would say that just Gardner's size and length, and not that Surtain was small, but Gardner plays a long game. That's the way he kind of plays. I would say they're somewhat different players. I would say that Surtain was probably a little more complete, but Gardner, in what he does, did it better than Surtain. So, I mean, again, now it comes down to what you want.
When we go to Stingley from LSU, I mean, a lot of guys like him because now he doesn't have the I guess you could say as long history as Sauce Gardner as an elite player.
10 games the last 2 years.
Right. So, but the tape is pretty intriguing from talking to personnel people. He also has good size of over 6 feet. What does his tape look like to you?
Yeah, and I went back and watched 2019, which was his first year when he played a full season, and people just said, "Oh, this guy's phenomenal." There's no question. He's got the physical and athletic traits that you'd look for in an outside corner. He's got good size. He's got athleticism. He's fluid. He's sudden at times. He's competitive. To me, at his best, he's a press man corner. I think he can play physical press. He can play mirror match press. He's loose-hipped. He makes easy transitions. The one thing that needs to be cleaned up, and I forget who taught me this years ago, but I look for this when I watch guys play press, is he does have a tendency to get back on his heels as his first reaction to the receiver when he's in press. That's going to have to be cleaned up. You can do that in college because you can compensate. In the NFL, you don't really want to do that because you lose your balance. And then it takes you half a beat to recover. And in the NFL, fractions matter. So that's going to have to be cleaned up. But I would say he's more comfortable playing press than he is playing off. He can play off, but I'd say that at times his transitions and direction changes and off coverage were a little stickier than you'd like. Not all the time, but it showed up. I've seen the comparison to Stephon Gilmore when Gilmore came out of South Carolina. I actually liked Gilmore more than Stingley when Gilmore came out, but hey, that's me. But I mean, Stingley's still a good prospect.
He was a former wide receiver, Greg.
Yeah,
Do you
and he
see
has
a lot of that in his game?
Yes, he's got great. I should have mentioned that. Thank you, Geoff, for bringing that up. He's got great ball skills and ball production, particularly on vertical throws outside the numbers, which are so much a part of the NFL game now. Particularly if you're going to play boundary corner where there's a lot of fades and back shoulder throws. He's got phenomenal ball skills, probably based on his background. That's a real strength of his game.
Real quick, were there some red? I know he had the foot injury, so he's only, as you mentioned, he's only played 10 games, I think, in the last 2 years.
He spent too much time with Liz Frank.
Yeah,
Oh,
a lot of people do.
One.
Yeah. So, but did you see anything on his tape this past year that you wouldn't attribute to maybe nursing an injury that had concerned you at all?
I've heard a lot because, as you guys know, I don't live under a rock. Although sometimes I feel that way, but
I was going to say I'm not 100% sure about that, but okay.
Yeah, and I've heard the whole thing about the effort. I never comment on guys' effort unless to me it's blatantly obvious, and I did not think that was the case at all. In fact, first game of this season was against UCLA. Okay, I watched the entire tape. The first 3 plays of the game, he was outstanding and aggressive, tackling and playing the run. I think it was the first 3 plays of the game. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I did not see that. Now again, maybe someone watching even more closely than I am, and talking to people, which I'm not doing. Maybe that was a factor. I don't think the tape really reflected that, but like I said, maybe I'm wrong.
So as we go through this class, we've got another guy that's going to most likely go in the first round. That's Andrew Booth, another long corner from Clemson. Greg, what do you think of him?
Yeah, he's really he'd be a good player for the Eagles because he's got man zone scheme versatility because that's what he did in college. And he's a really good player. And he is a physical dude now. I mean, he's got high level competitiveness, physical toughness. I thought he was as physically tough as any corner that I've seen up to this point. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I've seen 50 guys, so maybe there's someone who's more. I've probably seen 15. So he's really a physically tough guy. And you could see he embraces the physical nature of the game. That's important to him. He only made 15 starts at Clemson, so there'll be a bit of a learning curve. He has extensive experience, though, in those starts playing both man and zone. And what I really, really liked about him is in zone, because you don't see this a lot with college corners, is he had a really good understanding of receiver splits. His body and his eyes were in the right place, which is the way they teach zone coverage. I've been fortunate in my career to be in defensive back meetings at training camp, and they talk about eyes all the time, eye discipline versus eye variation. His eyes are in the right place. You could tell that they had a really good feel for route concept based on receiver locations. He was savvy. He was aware. I think he's just a really solid corner prospect. Like, I wouldn't say he's special, but I think he's one of those guys that you're going to line up and you're going to feel good about Andrew Booth being one of your outside corners.
Greg, one school that produces defensive backs well in the NFL is Washington. They've got a kid, McDuffie, Trent McDuffie, I believe is the name.
They've got two. Right.
Kyler Gordon, the other one? Right. So why don't we talk about both of them? Although it seems like Trent gets a little bit more respect from just the national.
And he
media,
should. But he's a more refined player. Gordon's a really good athlete. McDuffie's more refined. McDuffie is he's another guy that is physically tough. He's similar to Booth in that sense, in that he will drive downhill to tackle receivers. He'll play the run with physicality. There's an urgent feel watching him. He's competitive. He's a guy who played mirror match press man really comfortably, waited for the receiver to declare. Very smooth with his transition. Opened his hips smoothly, locked onto receivers, squeezed receivers to the sideline really well when they were released outside. Physical nature to his play. Used his arms really well. Pushed them to the sideline. And then one thing about Washington corners, because they put out a ton of corners every year, is these guys are really, really good. They must look for it when they recruit or they teach it to them there. These guys are really good in off coverage in terms of planting and driving on receivers and throws in front of them. They're explosive when they do that. Another guy like Booth showed great situational awareness as a zone defender, understood down and distance and its impact on positioning. What drives me nuts when I watch NFL tape, guys, it's when it's 3rd and 9 and a team decides to play zone and the outside corner jumps the 3-yard route. There's no reason for that. It's 3rd and 9. And then the ball gets thrown over his head for 14 yards and a first down. That's just having no situational awareness. I think McDuffie showed that in his tape, that he has a really good feel for situational awareness.
Greg, if you're the Giants and Donwick Martindale's there, you know his.
He's likes to play man. Played more zone this year because so many people got hurt. But I think he would rather play man.
So when you look at that division, Geoff and I always look at the NFC East because we cover the Eagles in this particular show a lot. So when you look at these corners here, would you say that Sauce Gardner could fit in any scheme? No, obviously man, because he's long and all that.
Yes.
Of all these corners here, do they all kind of? Could you think they could all fit in any particular scheme, or are some guys scheme specific that we've talked about?
Gardner could probably fit in any scheme. Um, I think to me, Stingley is better in man. I'm not saying he can't play zone, but I think right now, Stingley has not played a lot of football the last 2 years, by the way.
I know.
I would say he'd be better in, as they say, cat coverage. You got that, cat. Booth, I think, can play both, but I think he's really good in zone. I think he has a great feel for zone. McDuffie, I think, can play both. Look, these guys that draft, and I'm just being honest, they'll do these guys. I would assume, let's put it this way, the Eagles should be doing these guys in more detail than I'm doing these guys. I'm trying to watch 250 guys.
Right.
The Eagles should be grinding away on these guys, corners in particular, for obvious reasons. And they should have a really defined answer to that question, far more so than I would.
So if you take those four corners we've talked about, and I know you're not a GM and you like to say it's just about the tape for you, but you do, Greg, have a good sense of whether a guy has first round talent or late day 2 or maybe day 3. Are all four of the guys we talked about in your mind deserving of a first round label, or do you have some questions on anyone that would maybe you might not feel comfortable for saying as a first rounder?
Well, I'm not as good at that as you think, Geoff, but I'll answer that this way. It goes back to my initial answer. Corners premium in this league. So all these guys are going to get drafted in the first round. Whether they all have first round grades, because as you guys both know, in a normal draft, 15 guys might truly have first round grades. In a great draft, maybe 18 to 22 do. There's never 32 first round grades.
Right.
So, do I think all these guys will ultimately get drafted in the first round? Without looking at the list of the order of the draft right now, I would say that they all will, because the position is so important. And there's Roger McCreary from Auburn, who we could talk about as well, who his tape is really good. A lot of people are concerned about his arm length. He's got incredibly short arms. And I don't know if it's true, but I saw a stat on Twitter. So like I said, I don't know if it's true or not, or maybe the mailman told me, one or the other. But anyway, I saw a stat on Twitter that there's no corner in the NFL, starting corner, with arms as short as Roger McCreary. So does that mean you can't draft him? That now you get into how teams feel about that. He's a really good prospect. All you have to do is turn on the tape against LSU and Alabama when he played press man against Keyshawn Boutte, who will be a top 20 pick next year, and Jamison Williams and John Mechie, and did a really good job. And he's the exact same measurements as Tre'Davious White. And I really like Roger McCreary, but I can't speak to how a team feels about his arm length.
Does that, what about playing nickel? I mean, is that sort of an area where you might put a short arm corner and have him better suited?
It's a great question, because I made the point in my notes that I thought he could play inside as well. I said he played exclusively on the outside for Auburn in 2021. I believe he could also move inside and be an excellent slot corner. And I did say the concern with McCreary, so I guess I did take note of his arm length. I said the concern with McCreary on the outside is his size and length. But there are quality NFL corners with his height and weight measurables. Tre'Davious White is almost exactly the same as McCreary, has longer arms, but obviously White's one of the best man zone scheme versatile corners in the NFL.
Well, how about another one of the football playing Elams? Did you see Kaiir Elam?
I did.
Yeah, give us an idea. By the way, you might know his dad. Remember Abe Elam, and I think his uncle.
I remember Abe Elam. Yeah.
Yep.
And I think his cousin was Matt Elam.
Yeah, either cousin or I can't remember his uncle, but yeah, his dad's definitely Abe Elam. So, what did you think of his tape, Kaiir's?
Pretty good. He's another guy with that desirable size, length, strength profile to play press man. He really crowded and disrupted receivers off the line of scrimmage. And he was really physically tough through the early part of the route stem. There was a physical presence to the way he played. Another guy like McDuffie that squeezed outside release vertical routes to the sideline with physicality. He's got an edge to him. This kid is, he'd probably be a guy that secondary coaches would like in their room, in their secondary room. So I think that, he's another guy, and he could play off as well. He showed play and drive quickness and off coverage. Another guy that tends to be a little grabby. A lot of college corners tend to be grabby because you can do that in college. Much
Horn
more
was
so in the NFL.
Yep.
Yeah, Horn was coming into the draft, and that was the one negative that teams have. But so, by the way,
but you're allowed to do that in college. That's the thing. So I mean, it's a negative because in the NFL you can't, but you're allowed to do it in college.
Have you seen, off the top of your head, not just Horn, but guys who were grabby in college, and then do they generally get it cleaned up, or just over the years you watching tape?
They normally get it cleaned up, but I think they have a little bit of a learning curve because then they go the other way and they kind of lose their aggressiveness until they find the balance.
Ah, got you.
Greg, you had mentioned Tariq Woolen a little bit earlier. He's sort of a tantalizing prospect for some teams. I think he's out of UTSA.
He's out of UTSA, yep.
What is it that sort of makes him, that name makes his name pop a little bit?
6'4" and 1/8", 205, and ran a 4.26 40. There's not many human beings who can do that.
Yeah.
And his 10-yard split for a guy who's really long-legged and high cut was ridiculously good at 1.49. So his measurables are off. Plus, his vertical jump was 42, just like Caplan's, and his arm length was 33 and 5/8. So, I mean, this guy, his measurables are off the charts, Geoff, off the charts.
Now, how about his tape?
Yeah. It's up and down. Got to remember a couple of things. He began his career at wide receiver. He's only played corner for 2 years.
There you go.
So there's a lot of false steps. There's a lot of just the timing in playing press man is off. He'd wait too long before reacting to routes. He didn't locate the ball at times, when he played press, didn't get his head around. These are all nuances that he has to learn. And the long legs at times make him a little clunky in off coverage, zone coverage, just because he's so long. I mean, he's 6'4" and 1/8. What was the last 6'4" and 1/8 corner? Brandon Browner? I mean, I can't recall.
Yeah. How tall is Sherman? Richard Sherman?
He was 6'3".
Yeah, wow.
He was leggy too.
Yeah, he was a former receiver.
Yep. So, I mean, but when people look at, at what he did at the combine, he was a combine superhero, and these measurables are off the charts.
Mm-hmm.
Good team too, UTSA. They came out of nowhere.
I don't know, Geoff, if he's ready to play week 1.
Right.
I mean, despite these measurables, I think he'd have a tough time.
And any other corners that kind of jump at you that we haven't talked about? Like
there's two guys who kind of fit into a similar box that kind of are, next tier guys after the main guys, and that's MJ Emerson from Mississippi State and Caleb Evans from Missouri. They're both big. They're both long. I think they're really good prospects. I think that, Emerson obviously had a matchup in the SEC, as did Evans. So, I think both those guys sort of fall into that next category. If you're not drafting a corner in the top 50 and maybe you get to the 3rd round and these guys are sitting there, I think they're good prospects.
On Emerson, real quick, 2 things that he's got going for him: incredibly large hands for a corner, very long arms.
Yeah,
that does mean something.
It sure does.
Coaches.
His arm length is 33 and a half, which is longer than some offensive linemen.
Yeah, that's incredible. So
I think he's one of the more intriguing corner prospects because he's everything you said, Adam. He's got size, he's got length, long arms. He can play both physical press man, mirror match press man. You wouldn't say he's twitchy and sudden because 6'2" corners are usually not. But he was athletic and efficient with his movement. He rarely took wasted steps. I kind of liked his tape. I mean, I think he's going to be a really interesting prospect.
By the way, is this the tallest group of corners you've ever watched tape?
Well, they're getting taller and taller because receivers are getting bigger and bigger.
By the way, they're switching from receiver to corner. We must have mentioned like 3 or 4 guys who've done that.
It's amazing. Yeah. Well, corners become a more premium position, and guys get to play more.
Yeah,
definitely. Now the Evans kid, Caleb Evans, is from Missouri, correct?
Yeah, he 1 year in Missouri after 4 years, I believe, at Tulsa, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
He was I think a graduate transfer, which a lot of guys did. But yeah,
coming
I think
off
it was
a pretty good year, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, you like his tape? Yeah, I said he's coming off a pretty good year. I thought he was at the Senior Bowl, but I'm not 100% sure on that, but I thought he was there.
Yeah, I liked his tape. I think he's, again, you wouldn't call him twitchy or sudden, but
Right.
he's long, he's smooth, can play press, physical, competitive. When he played press, he jammed receivers a lot, disrupted them off the line of scrimmage. Again, another guy that's way too handsy, way too grabby through the route and the top of the stem, and that has to be addressed. No way to know if it works or not, but it has to be addressed. Not as efficient in off coverage because he's high cut,
Gotcha.
So, but I think that he'll play in the league. He could develop into a starter. And, again, 6'2". There's, guys want corners that have length now.
Gotcha. We will transition now to safety. We will ask you about the top prospect at safety, even though the Eagles will very unlikely to come away with this guy, but maybe somebody else in the NFC East. The Giants have two high picks. Kyle Hamilton from Notre Dame, who's, been making some headlines, I guess, because he didn't run the most blazing 40, but I'll ask you, I mean, the tape speed and the tape performance has to be pretty darn good, huh?
Yeah, tape's good. I mean, he's not at his best moving backwards, so that's not his game, but he's long, he's fluid, he glides, plays with quick eyes, recognizes things, has very good play speed and range, naturally athletic. His combination of athletic and physical traits in a body like that is, you don't see something like that very often. And, he's a really good prospect. I mean, he's another guy that in this draft is clearly a top 5 prospect.
And you could line him up. He's also long. He's over 6'4", so you can line him up deeper inside. Like you can move him around.
Yeah, you can move him around. He's just not at his best retreating and playing backwards, but I wouldn't expect him to be.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think the question on prospects like this, Greg, and this is really more for GMs, is that when you're picking in the top 5, you tend to have a lot of holes on your team.
Yep.
And how feasible, how significant is it to use maybe your first pick on a safety? And again, the safety we just talked about
here's the
how
issue,
important
Geoff.
they are. But
here's the issue with that, okay? And this is why I struggle with not you. You're just giving kind of a point of view that's thrown out there all the time.
Right.
People will say, well, that position is not worthy of a top 5 or a top 10 pick. You hear that a lot, okay? All right, so let's say you got a bad offensive line and a Quentin Nelson type guard is sitting there and you draft him. And then all the geniuses say that, oh, how can you draft a guard with the 5th pick in the draft? So let's say you don't draft the guard with the 5th pick and you draft, a more premium position. And then the NFL season starts and your team stinks because you don't have a good offensive line. The guys sitting there like us who tweet and act like we know what we're talking about. We don't have to answer for that. We just move on to the next thing. But the team, because now they can't pass protect or they can't run the ball, whereas maybe if they drafted the offensive guard, they'd be a better team. So those kinds of things, that's all BS. That if you're weak at a position that impacts your ability to function in a given area, that's going to prevent you from winning games or being competitive, then you know what? It's a position worth addressing.
Sure. And you like this kid in any scheme, in Kyle Hamilton. I mean, he's a
good player.
Impact player from
He's a good prospect. Yeah, I should say
prospect. I would say this, Greg. I would say this, though. If you talk to personnel people, what's your position board? What's most important? And you grade them. Guard is certainly down below. However,
of course it is.
When guys elite, like you mentioned Quentin Nelson, you draft him. Yeah. He's got to be elite. I don't have a problem with Hamilton going in the top 5, top 10. If he's elite, draft him.
No. But, I was using that as an example. The point I'm trying to make, which is a larger point, and I'm not ripping anybody because, hey, I'm wrong just like the next guy, okay? Everybody's wrong. I'm wrong, and I'll be the first to admit it. I've admitted, when I did that, wrong on guys. That's not the point. But the point is, if you talk to coaches, not scouts and not evaluators, and there are two different conversations, as both you guys know, it's two totally different conversations. What's that?
No, it's amazing how different you could talk to a coach and you could talk to a personnel guy. They see a player completely different.
Totally different conversations.
Yeah.
A coach thinks about what he can do on Sunday with his playbook, okay? And if you're bad, we're talking safety now. If you're bad at safety, your playbook's limited.
Yes.
So now that coach, as he prepares to play whatever team, one of the better teams in the league, let's say, he's thinking, well, shoot, I can't do these 4 things. So I have to be a little more predictable. I've got to kind of compensate for the fact that Geoff Mosher doesn't quite have the range I'd really like to have at safety. So I have to, kind of do this. Yeah, I mean, that's what happens.
Yeah,
so it's all great to talk about it now and on draft day to sit there and go, oh, how could you draft a safety there, until you got to play the games.
Right. Well, no doubt about it.
That's the only point I'm trying to make.
Got to line up with somebody.
You got to line up with somebody.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So the safety group, and we see this a lot. Obviously, Hamilton is considered one of the best prospects in the draft. 2 other guys that come to mind, 2 Big Ten guys, Hill out of Michigan and Jaquan Brisker out of Penn State. Before you even break them down, Daxton Hill, Jaquan Brisker, how sizable is the gulf between what they can be, what kind of prospects they are compared to Kyle Hamilton?
Well, I think Hill's totally different.
Mm-hmm.
Brisker is theoretically similar in how he'd be deployed. Hill is totally different. And I'll start with Brisker because I want to get to Hill because, quite frankly, Hill was one of my most favorite players to watch, and I knew nothing about him before I watched him, other than, seeing some games on TV where I wasn't studying him and, I was just watching the games. Brisker's a really good prospect. Brisker kind of reminds me of the Bills safeties. I thought of Poyer and Hyde when I was watching Brisker. High level versatility to play on the back end or in the box, both in the run game and in pass coverage. Brisker is very controlled and efficient in his movement, and he has great awareness and could really play effectively with his eyes. And that's why I thought of Poyer and Hyde. You don't think of Poyer and Hyde as the best athletes at the safety position, but because they play so controlled and so comfortably, and they know what they're looking at, they seemingly are always in the right place. And Brisker struck me that way. I think Jaquan Brisker, and Geoff, you can dance here a little if you like, being the Penn State guy. I think Brisker's a really, really good prospect. I think he's just one of those guys that sees it, gets it, no wasted motion, knows where has to be. I think he's just a really good prospect.
And Greg, with Hill, he's got the great measurable size. Arm length for a safety is super long. I mean, he's got a wingspan, which is what you look for in tackles. So what did his tape look like?
Well, first of all, he's a little different guy because Hill played safety in their base defense, okay? And in their sub, he played slot corner. So he is a fascinating prospect because of that. And he is super athletic. He's 6 feet, 191, ran a great 40, whatever that means. Well, what it means is he's fast. And fast guys usually run fast.
His 10-yard split was phenomenal, by the way.
Yeah,
right?
He's long, he's rangy, he's twitchy, he's explosive. He can play on the back end. He can play in the slot. Shoot, I finished watching this guy thinking this guy could play corner in the NFL.
Wow.
Wow. I really like Daxton Hill. I think he's one of the best overall defensive prospects in the draft.
Wow.
Now, I'm not saying he should be a top, that's not my deal. But I think he's one of the best overall defensive prospects in this draft class.
See, that always fascinates me because, we go back to that discussion we had. Teams generally that we talk to prefer, not every team, but a lot of teams like to build from the inside out, right? So that's why you see a lot of linemen, left tackles, pass rushers, D tackles going in the top 15. And sometimes that pushes really good, and quarterbacks too, of course. Sometimes that pushes really good secondary players, Greg, the back end, right, to the middle or lower when they could potentially be top 15 worthy prospecks.
Well,
you always see the run on the tackles,
right. And again, then it comes down to philosophy. I mean, and it's interesting how there's still a dichotomy between just what you said and what the game is, because everybody talks, as Adam and being at the combine and talking to people, everybody talks about the passing game and explosives, right? Isn't that what people talk about? Yeah. The next breath they'll say, "Oh, we got to draft defensive tackles."
Right.
So, or slot corner has never been a premium position in a draft, but yet if you don't have one, you're in deep, when you get into these, when you have to play the Rams, you don't have a slot corner, you got a bit of a problem.
Right.
Okay. So, again, I'm not smarter than anybody else. That's not my point. But the point is that if you can't defend the passing game in the NFL, you got a problem. And unless that deep tackle is a good pass rusher, I'll give you an example. Jordan Davis, okay? Freakish, okay? He did not play on third down, Geoff.
I saw.
So if he didn't play on third down for Kirby Smart, is he going to play on third down in the NFL? So I'm not saying he's not really good at what he does, okay?
Right.
But and I'm not going to sit here and tell you he should or shouldn't be drafted in the first round because I don't have a board, okay? So I don't do that. But if he's not going to play on third down, or he's rarely going to play in your sub defense, what is the value of the player in today's NFL, no matter how good what he does really well is?
Right. I would say we have seen, Adam, we've talked about this, sort of a shift. Some teams now prioritize building back to I think the Patriots do that. They put a lot more investment in corner and safety and with their multiple packages than they do, say, up front. The Vikings, we've talked about the fact that they've drafted corner a lot higher than defensive line over the last few years. Certainly when Brian Flores was with the Dolphins, he was putting a lot more investment in the secondary, hoping that the better coverage and the more they do on the back end helps the pressure get to the quarterback more. Almost the reverse logic of let's let our defensive front help our corners and our safety.
I think most coaches, and if there was a coach here, maybe tell me I was wrong, but I've had these conversations, obviously. I think most coaches would tell you, Geoff, that it's much easier to scheme pressure than it is to scheme coverage. Now, you can disguise coverage with late movement, no question. There are teams that do that really well. But I think most people would agree that you can scheme pressure. And if you can't cover, or if you feel like you have to compensate for your ability to cover, I think that poses a problem.
Well, it's interesting. I always love the draft to see the different philosophies and where guys go compared to, does it match up with their organizational philosophy? Let's
there's a lot of older coaches in the league, and I'm not knocking them. Hey, they're smarter than I am, okay? No question. Yeah. But there's certainly a lot of older coaches in the league that still believe old school, you got to stop the run first.
Right.
And we're going to draft a defensive tackle to do that, and then we'll go from there.
Right. That's true. So who are some other safeties that have popped for you on tape? Some guys you liked watching?
The kid I really, really liked and was Brian Cook out of the University of Cincinnati. They have 5 guys who are going to be drafted, could well be drafted in the top 90 or top 100.
Amazing.
I really liked Cook. Now, most people are going to say his best deal is playing the run because he played the run really well, both from a box overhang alignment and coming downhill from the back end. He was as good a tackler at the safety position as that I've seen, and I haven't seen them all. So had great balance, great body control. He squared up to take down runners and receivers. He played with an attitude. He's a tempo setter for a defense. The 2 main questions that will impact his projection and transition to the league are whether teams can feel he can effectively match up man-to-man to quality receiving tight ends, especially when those tight ends are detached from the formation. Now, Cook has the size and length to do that. Whether he can do it, that remains a question. And the other question is whether he can be a viable post safety as part of your foundational defense. I would think he could do both, but I don't know that. Teams do more research than I. But it would not surprise me. And I actually watched him at the podium at the combine, and he came across really well. it would not surprise me if in a couple of years down the road we're talking about Cook as one of the better safeties in the game. He struck me as that kind of guy.
Sure.
Nice. Anyone else?
Well, the guy who people got all excited about, and for good reason, was Lewis Seen.
Yeah.
From Georgia.
Yeah.
One of Georgia's 300 guys on defense that'll be in this draft.
Between Georgia and Cincinnati, I mean, it might just go Georgia guy, Cincinnati guy, Georgia guy, Cincinnati guy.
Yeah. Well, Lewis Seen is long, lean, and because he ran a 4.37 at the combine, people got all excited. Now, he's a fascinating player to watch because of the way he plays the game. I mean, this guy is super competitive. He has an urgent feel to the way he plays. He's an attitude and tempo guy as well. I mean, this guy, he attacks downhill and pursues with play speed and stride length. And when he gets there, he freaking hits you. He's very straight line. He's a straight line linear athlete. So his game speed and his style of play does match his testing numbers, but he's very linear. And therefore he's a little tight in his hips. So he's not really a transition change of direction guy. He just makes the kind of plays where you go, wow, look at that, because he just runs and hits. Now, he did match up to tight ends in Georgia's defense. So the question is, can he do that against the really good tight ends in the NFL? And because he does have experience matching up to tight ends, but there's not a lot of good tight ends in college football. So that's an open question.
Right.
I think that he's probably a guy that needs to play in a predominant split safety coverage scheme. The question there, though, is when you face 2x2 sets and number 2 is a wideout, can he handle wideouts running vertically? Because it becomes man if you're playing cover 4.
Right.
I think that he has to play in a defense that understands both his strengths and his limitations. But he's an attitude defender with an alpha dog mindset, and every coach likes that.
Sounds like a pretty good prospect. And if you can improve upon that, maybe that hip flexibility, you might be able to get even better out of him.
Oh, no, he brings it now. This kid, I mean, and he did it against everybody. He played in the SEC. So,
sure.
He comes downhill and he lays the wood now.
One more question, just on Hamilton and Hill, because you love Hill. It's very clear. I mean,
I love his versatility. The fact that he can play safety and line up at slot corner.
So what? I mean, is there a distinct difference between Hamilton and Hill based on your tape study?
Well, Hamilton's not going to play slot corner.
Okay.
But again, that's a great question, because I could make the argument to me, and again, maybe I'll be told I'm dead wrong and I'm stupid, but I could make the argument that depending on your team and what you're looking for, that Hill brings more versatility to the table than Hamilton.
That's interesting.
That depends on your team, and it depends on how you see it. I mean, Hill is really an explosive mover. He's a twitchy kid, and he's got, like I said, I watched him, and Matt Bowen agreed with me, and I defer to him very often. A lot of times when I watch DBs, I'll text him right when I'm done and say, have you seen this guy? And then we get into a 10-minute discussion about the guy if he's seen him. And he agreed with me that, hey, this guy almost looks like he could play corner on the outside.
Question, when you and Matt watch tape.
And we don't watch together, by the way. So,
No, but let's say like you text him, hey, did you see him? When you disagree, will one of you guys go back and watch again and say, hey, I didn't see that. Let me go back. Like how would you – do you guys ever do that?
What normally happens is we don't disagree in that sense. We sort of say, like, I didn't quite see it that way, but I could see your point. Because, I like to think reasonable people can do that. Hey, if you bring something up to me that I didn't quite see, and then I think about it, I go, yeah, I get that.
Okay.
I don't have to go watch 10 more plays to get it.
Okay.
I've just watched them. So I go, oh yeah, you know what? I get that. That didn't register immediately to me, but I see the point exactly now that you said it. That's what happens a lot when I talk to coaches, is they say it in a way where I go, oh yeah, I got that exact. Like when I went to this coaching collective last summer and got an opportunity to have great conversations with NFL coaches like Mike McDaniel, who's now the head coach of the Dolphins. And I spent 2 hours talking with him. And while he was showing me film of the zone run game, he's saying things that there's no way I could possibly know, but I knew it as soon as he said it. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
So I came away from spending time with him saying, wow, I really know a lot. But also in my next breath, I said, boy, there's a lot of stuff I can't possibly know. So yeah, it just opens your mind to saying, oh yeah, I get that. I see that too. I am never one to say you're wrong, because I know guys see things totally differently, and I get that. I totally get that.
All right. Well, that is it for cornerbacks and safeties. That was a great conversation right there. Not just on prospects, but also philosophy. So everyone, I hope, enjoys this episode. We'll be back next week with yet another one. Do we know yet what we want to focus on, or we'll keep that?
No, I'll be grinding this week, Jeff. I'm
how about
I'm getting there. What's that?
D-line. Deanne's
have we done pass rushers yet?
We have not.
I don't think so.
We have not.
We'll do that next week.
Got it.
Pass rushers next week. That's always a great episode.
Because there's going to be a lot of controversy about that too, because there's no super big time pass rusher in this draft, in my view, anyway.
That doesn't mean
they won't get drafted high. That's irrelevant.
Oh, okay. As long as we've been talking over the years, this might be the strongest you've been on DBs, man. I'm hoping these guys play, because you're just going by the tape. But man, your praise has been strong, for these guys.
I think I think DB has become a position now where I think that, well, I know this for a fact. I think a lot of younger kids who start out at receiver are being told by coaches when they're in high school that you have a better chance of playing in the NFL if you're a corner.
How about that?
And, because there's a ton of wide receivers who play, and even though there's a ton of corners that play, there's more wide receivers that end up with some form of production than there are corners. And I think that if you're a really good athlete and you're 15 years old, you have a better chance of being, a big-time college player and a potential NFL player at corner, whereas wide receiver, there's a lot of guys.
Nice.
Yeah, definitely.
That's true.
So I think a lot of these guys now, you're seeing really good athletes play corner.
No,
that'll explain it.
Comes at a good time for the Eagles, who need both help at corner and safety, and we expect they'll target both in this.
I would love to know who they like, and you guys will probably find that out. I guess I could too, but I would, they're not going to give you, they're not going to sit down and show you their board, but I would love to know who they like, because I've done work on a lot of these guys and I know how I see them, and I'd love to know who they like.
Well, they do have Ahmad Sauce Gardner coming into the to Philadelphia for one of those what they call them 30 visits, top 30 visits or official visits. This coming weekend.
They would need to move up. They would need to really move up to get him.
No, well, you don't bring a guy in usually unless you have some degree of interest and knowledge of where he's expected to go.
Especially since you only get 30, so you don't bring a guy in just for the hell of it.
Yeah, just to kick the tires. That's right. So we will see with that. All right, next week, pass rushers. This past week, cornerback safeties. Great conversation. That's going to do it. For Adam Caplan and Greg Cosell, I'm Geoff Mosher, and you've been watching The Intel with Greg Cosell.